Hello and welcome to an edition of Iain Dale All Talk, which is going to double as my book club podcast as well. The reason is we're talking to someone today, David Amess, who's written this book, Eyes and Ears. It's not an autobiography. It's subtitled A Survivor's Guide to Westminster. And David, you have been an MP since 1983. You must be one of the longest serving MPs now. You could be Father of the House soon.
Oh dear. I'm number 7.
Number 7. Not that you've looked.
So I have. I'm always inquiring about their health. So on the Conservative side, it's Peter Bottomley. And the only other Conservative ahead of me is Edward Lee, who was elected the same time as I was. And if I'd have known he was standing in front of me in the queue, I would have bashed him out of the way. On the Labour side, the ones ahead of me are Barry Shearman, Harriet Harman, and Nick Brown. And Jeremy Corbyn.
Well,
so Jeremy was standing right in front of me. So look, hey, you can't plan things in life. But
indeed you can't. Well, look, let's talk about that, because as I say, it's not an autobiography, but it sort of is. I mean, there's lots of autobiographical bits in it. You talk about your upbringing, how you got into politics, how you got into Parliament. And I think you've been in Parliament at an amazing time. I mean, we were talking before we started, you said, well, from Margaret Thatcher to Boris Johnson. And I said, from the sublime to the ridiculous. But as you say in the book, the House of Commons is so different when you were first elected.
The place has changed out of all recognition. And in fact, Ian, I've been recently been speaking to colleagues who've only just left, and I said, if you return now, you would find it even less recognisable. So although the building is sort of the same, the people who are now MPs are very, very different. The hours that we sit, the way we deal with legislation has changed completely, really. And, you know, look, I'm not an old boy yet. And if you'd have told me that in such a short space of time, it would have changed. But look, when I first started, there was my secretary, a golf ball typewriter, sending out letters which would take 4 or 5 days to get to people. Now, with emails, bang! And of course, people want an instant response to whatever the issue is they're raising. So it's very, very different. And the type of colleagues in all parties has changed completely.
How has the internet in particular and the advancement of technology, how has that changed the job, apart from the sort of people expecting a reply immediately?
I think it's messed it up in a way, because there are organisations now who start campaigns, and the people whose names you're receiving half the time aren't even aware that they're signed up to these campaigns. And of course, colleagues who haven't been in the House too long, they're panicked. There's immediately an issue going, and they get on to ministers, and you know, it's not a good way to make policies at all. So that's very, very bad, really, I think. And of course, all the abuse that you get online now is pretty grim. I never engage with anyone who happens to be critical of me online, but again, some of my colleagues do. They seem to enjoy having an argument about it all, but no, I don't.
But do you think that because you're now in a safe... I mean, you spent half of your parliamentary career in a marginal seat, and now you're in a safe seat. I mean, that must be a very different experience. The job must be different in a way.
It is.
Because if you're in a safe seat, you can actually tell someone to sod off if they're being awful, which you just can't do if you're in a marginal.
A few of my colleagues who've left the House, they used to do that. But look, the reason I've survived is every election I treat it as if it is still a marginal seat. Never take anything for granted. Huge shifts. Well, you know, we've recently had elections. Who'd have thought that the Conservative Party would be winning all these seats up north? Absolutely incredible. So I having taken over a seat represented by the Guinness family for 100 years, I think it was a bit of a shock to them that they got this East End West Ham supporting lad from Basildon. And of course they'd had the gentry
Chips
connections with the royal family,
Yeah.
for goodness sake. And they suddenly had me. But, you know, I was out there bashing on the doors. I had my mobile home with my campaign signature tune. Don't ask me to sing it.
I wouldn't dare.
Okay, because it'll
We
put
might do a
off
rendition
the
of I'm
listeners.
Forever Blowing Bubbles at the end, but just as a special treat.
But yeah, no, I do not take the size of the majority for granted, because you can lose it very, very quickly. And I've never forgotten in 1997 when we were reduced to 165. Michael Shersby lost his seat. Died of a heart attack. We're down 164. And some of my colleagues before that election, with large majorities, they didn't think they were going to lose. And it played havoc on their health, and not good. So I prepare myself for the rejection that might possibly come from the electorate, and fingers crossed it's going to be okay. So I don't think, I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm diplomatic, at least in emails and on the phone.
Let's talk about your background, because you mentioned you grew up in the East End. Tell us about your upbringing, childhood, education.
Yeah, well, sad that it is, we've still kept the family home in Forest Gate. Major renovation, but I just love the East End of London, although it's changed completely. So born into poverty, you know, the violins will come out now, but mum and dad in a little terraced house, sort of about 150 years old. And, you know, my father worked for the LEB. He was an electrician. My mother was a seamstress and a cook, and she eventually became famous in the City of London as a tea lady. So she used to push the tea trolley along. So it was a background where I was living in an area which had always been Labour. The Labour MP, Arthur Lewis, had been there for over 40 years, never held surgeries. The council, always Labour. I mean, if you look at it now, there still aren't any Conservatives on the council. So that's all I'd ever known. And we didn't have cars. We used our legs to walk everywhere. We didn't have telephones. We threw the window open and shouted loudly at one another. And we didn't have a refrigerator. We had a larder. Mother used to walk me 2.5 miles to school each day. But did I feel as if I was poor? Did I feel as if I was working class? Did I feel as if I had a chip on my shoulder? Absolutely no way. I had a very happy childhood. We didn't have any money. Skimped and scraped. My parents, I mean, my mother, who lived to be nearly 105, she wore the trousers in the relationship, and my father went along with it all. But I really feel that the things that were done for me as a child and at school have made me what I am today. Whether people like what I am today, I don't know. But I've been doing reasonably well in terms of the ballot box. So that those values and the reason that I came to join the political party that I did were all shaped in the East End of London, down to earth.
And when did the political bug first bite?
Right. A Mr. Catton who lived opposite me, unbeknown to me, was the treasurer of the local ward, and he kept delivering leaflets through the letterbox. I read them, and I thought, well, they're complaining about this, they're complaining about that. I agree. The roads are dirty. The houses are becoming a bit run down. Facilities aren't so good. So I didn't understand the philosophy between as it was, mainly the two parties then. But I answered one of his newsletters, joined the party at whatever the earliest age was, 15 or 16, and have been a Conservative ever since. But it was going to my school, St Bonaventure's, who held mock elections in 1964 and 1966. Wait for it, Ian. I didn't stand for the Conservative Party. I stood for the Revolutionist Party.
Well, in 1979, when I was at school, I did stand for the Conservative Party at my school in Essex, and I got a bigger majority than Margaret Thatcher. So. Mind you, the National Front came second, so that tells you what those days were like.
But yeah, so I joined all because of Mr. Catlin, and then I became the chairman of the local ward, chairman of the association.
So you came up through the party?
Did, and that's what you see. I feel passionately about today. I much prefer colleagues who've done their service in the party, have worked their way up for ranks. I mean, I did everything, organised jumble sales. Don't think you have jumble sales anymore. Bric-a-brac, knocked on thousands and thousands and thousands of doors, delivered a huge number of leaflets. And I think when someone hasn't got any sort of political background, and they wake up in the morning thinking, yeah, I think I'll do the Conservative Party a favour. I'll stand for them. Doesn't go down well with me at all, Ian.
Well, we're recording this in the aftermath of the May local elections and Scottish and Welsh Assembly elections and the mayoral elections. And I think I had a bit of an epiphany at the weekend where I wrote an article where I said, I think we learnt a lot about Keir Starmer this weekend, about his reaction to defeat. I said, I don't think he would have had this reaction or this sort of slightly panicked rabbit in a headlights look had he actually come up through the Labour Party.
Absolutely.
You and I can probably name a lot of business people who've come into politics over the years but have never quite made it in the way that they did in business. John Davis, Archie Norman, people like that, who never really understood the Conservative Party.
So agree.
And I mean, okay, you want a mixture of people in Parliament, don't you? And I mean, it's a good thing to have the ex-DPP in Parliament in many ways. But I don't think he would have reacted in that way had he known his party a bit better than he does.
No, and by the way, Archie Norman, brilliant businessman, what he did for Asda and the TV company, they put him up against John Prescott. I mean, how stupid was that? So I really do feel that Keir Starmer, who my wife said from the moment he appeared, it's not going to work for Labour. She's been proved right. I did think, although he's not really a politician at all, I thought he might develop a bit of charisma.
Did you read that comment at the weekend? Very cruel, I thought. Someone said, well, Keir Starmer would make a perfect husband, but you wouldn't want to shag him. And I'm thinking, is that the perfect husband?
Well, I am staggered the way it's just fallen apart so quickly. Unbelievable.
But you've seen it all before, and this is the thing, isn't it? When you get to a certain age, and you I think are 10 years ahead of me, but when you get to a certain age, you think you'll never see things again. I thought I would never see the Labour Party becoming left-wing again.
I know.
But we have. You look at a lot of economic policies that are coming in now, and you think, well, that reminds me of the 70s. That nothing is forever. Is that the right phrase here?
No, it is.
It does make you feel a bit old though when you sort of say to younger people, "Oh well, I've seen it all before."
Oh look, I stand up and said, well, I spoke on the first day of the Queen's speech, and the lovely Labour lady who followed me said it was a great honour to follow me, which of course they say, but it isn't really. She said, I was 2 when I was elected, and I thought, oh crikey, this is a long time. But you have to be careful, don't you? Keep on living in the past, and all of that. But I do think, Ian, that we've seen great politicians, extraordinary times, and I just feel the way the place is now, and the way politicians are now, it really isn't quite as it was. Like it all throughout the world.
You're sounding like an old git.
Am I?
Well,
really?
I mean, I do that as well, but I always qualify it by, because I think when you were first elected in 1983, there will have been older Conservative MPs who said, well, it's not like it was in Harold Macmillan's day. Then you had real characters and really weighty politicians. Now we've got Norman St John Stevens and all the rest of it. And I think nowadays, and But on the other hand, I genuinely believe that you haven't got the weighty people in Parliament now that there were in the 70s and 80s. I think the current, I don't expect you to comment on this, but the current cabinet, I think, is the most supine cabinet with, I think, a general lack of talent that I've seen in all my life. And they just don't stand up. They don't do what a cabinet is supposed to do.
I won't comment on that.
No, I didn't think you would.
If you think about party conferences now, they're rubbish.
Yeah.
Our people, they don't make speeches, get you standing up on the end of the seat. They sit there like Val Doonican. Well, he was a great artist, sitting on a chair.
Now you are showing your age.
and they just talk to people. I want to somehow enthuse young people to get involved. And I think the way we do things at the moment, okay, the pandemic has messed everything up. It's wreaked havoc in all of our lives. And of course, when you've got colleagues on Zoom, probably in their pyjamas, the bottom half, etc., it sort of says it all, doesn't it, really? But that's a result.
I actually did that once because, you know, I do Good Morning Britain every Friday morning. Yeah. I remember, I think the first one I did from home, Kate Garraway said something along the lines of, well, he may have a shirt and jacket on, but who knows what's down below? And I said, do you want to see? And so I stood up and I had these sort of tracky bottoms on.
But look, you and I do really come from the same school of thought. So just take Prime Minister's Question Time. It used to be Tuesdays and Thursdays for 15 minutes. Absolutely packed. Quality questions. They're rubbish now. I mean, just standing up, oh, great one.
Well, there was, I mean, come on, you must have done that with Margaret Thatcher.
Well, of course I did.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course I did. But I just feel that the way the chamber now, half the time, because of the televising of Parliament, not only the televising of Parliament, but we sit in our offices now, and there it is all on the screen. So there aren't so many people there. I think that's changed the atmosphere, really. I'm not saying we should get back to the good old days. To me, they were good old days. But I do think we need to consider much more carefully how we deal with legislation, truncating everything, because as we know, the guillotine was introduced during the Blair years. I don't think is good. I want ministers to argue their points now, not just bring any debate to an end, because the quality of the legislation, I think we wouldn't be popular with my colleagues, but we should work longer hours. You know, there we were, Monday to Thursday, starting at 2:30, going through the wee hours of the morning. Well, okay, we can't go back to that, but I do think we should make the chamber the centre of everything we do, and it isn't quite like that anymore.
Because the select committees have actually taken over quite a lot, haven't they? And
well,
they've taken on an
Norman
importance.
St. Stevens,
I did, and it's all his fault.
And it was his fault. It was his idea that we should have it, and God bless Norman. It was good, but I don't think he would have approved the way it's taken over completely, because when you think we had the state opening of Parliament, which should have been the big news, really, but it was sort of overtaken by 2 evidence sessions in 2 of our select committees yesterday. Well, that can't be right, I think. You know, I say to some of our younger, newly elected colleagues, when you made your maiden speech, it was a huge event. Now there's no one there. They even make maiden speeches one after another. When I say to them, hang on, don't listen to what the whips say to you. It's a special event. Have your family and friends in. It's the only time really the House doesn't interrupt you, although Edwina, as I said in the book, did make a little intervention on me, and the House is very kind and listens. So I think that the way we do things now, if everyone leaves the House of Parliament, and we've only got people who've been there, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years, it's going to go down a different course completely. And never forget the SNP, Ian, if they did have their way, because they don't really like the House of Commons, so they tell us, we wouldn't be going through the division lobbies, we'd be doing more and more remote voting. And like you, I'm really proud of the Mother of Parliaments, although Chris Bryant corrected me that, and he said it's not the Mother of Parliaments.
I was just about to do the same.
Yeah, and you were going to do the same.
England is the Mother of Parliaments.
I could see by your face. But all I'm saying, legislators all over the world have tried to copy us, and I'm just so proud of it. I don't want us to leave the building. I think if anyone's going to leave the building, it should be the Lords. We should move into the Lords, and hopefully the present Speaker is sort of working on it, because I don't know about you, Ian, but I think there's an awful lot of restoration and renewal going on while we're still in the building.
Yeah, I know there is. You stood for Parliament in Newham North West, obviously hopeless seat before you got elected in 1983. Were you expecting to be elected in 1983? Because it was such a massive majority and there were so many MPs. And I can remember, I think my first ever visit to the House of Commons in July 1983, the MP that I'd worked for in Norwich, Patrick Thompson, he'd been elected. He invited us for sort of tea on the terrace. And we were joined by the MP for Barrow in Furness, Cecil Franks.
Cecil.
And he sat down looking as if he'd got all the woes of the world on his shoulder. And I said, "What's the matter? You don't look very pleased to be here." He said, "Well, I'm not. I never expected to be elected. And now I'm here. And I don't want to be here."
And you see, Ian, we would have this conversation with some of my colleagues. They wouldn't have a clue about it. But you said Cecil looked as if he had the troubles of the world on his shoulders. He did. And it didn't end terribly well, unfortunately, for Cecil, because you never know what's going on. And of course, you mentioned Mr. Patrick Thompson, who was wonderful. And wasn't it John Powell?
John Powley.
Yeah, who was his...
He was the other MP in Norwich and who died about a year ago.
Goodness.
Yeah, and I can't explain. Okay, when you visit somewhere like the House of Commons for the first time, you are completely in awe of the place. And then I spent 2 years working there, and it was a totally different atmosphere. Now it may be just I was young, very young then, was easily impressed. But even now, when I go in there, there's still that sense of sort of wonderment, isn't there?
Oh, it's just 1,000 years old going to Westminster Hall. It's just magnificent. I certainly did not expect to win in 1983. I had many relatives living in Basel and didn't really like it, because being a Londoner, to go from old buildings to everything new was a bit of a shock. I think I was about the 144th seat that could be won, something like that. And I thought we were going to come a good second. I'd rehearsed with everyone how to behave. But hey, Ian, wasn't I lucky? The SDP, they did it for me. And it was Sue Slipman.
Oh, was she your opponent? I remember her.
Stood for the
Wasn't she head of the NUS or something?
She was.
Yeah.
She was.
And also communist, I think.
But, Julian Fulbrook, who was a Labour opponent, and his wife, they arrived there, of course. It was a complete shoo-in, and it was a shock to them. No, I wasn't prepared for it. Ian, I'd only ever been to the House of Commons physically once in my life, in the public gallery, and suddenly I was there. It was without any doubt at all that moment when I was first elected, when there wasn't even a journalist from the local paper that eventually got there covering the whole thing, was for me the greatest personal moment. I'll only ever be known for 1992, where for...
We'll come on to that.
Oh, okay. I'll shut up.
But you, in a way, you were sort of the archetypal Thatcher creation, weren't you? So working class boy, made good. And although we look now and the Tories are getting 48% of the working class vote, that wasn't quite that high at that time, I think. But of course, the sale of council houses, she built this electoral coalition, which for the first time included the so-called C2 D2s. I always hate using those expressions. But when you first got into Parliament, was there a bit of imposter syndrome there? You sort of thought, what's a boy from the East End of London doing in a place like this?
Well, one Conservative colleague looked at me and asked me, would I pair with him? So he thought I was Labour. I had longish hair then.
You did, yes.
And I feel inadequate and inferior? Because I was so in awe of the place, I did inwardly, I didn't show, I was worried whether I would be able to cope with it, whether I was good enough, because there were so many colleagues there who were so eloquent. I thought highly intelligent, although, of course, as time wore on, I began to doubt whether they're so highly intelligent, because you can be intelligent, can't you, Ian? But if you haven't got any common sense, then you're struggling a bit. So I did feel inadequate. But then, of course, because there was a big intake, I looked at a number of my colleagues and I thought, well, hang on, you're a bit rough as well. So, yeah, I'm in good company.
And there was a lot of competition among the new MPs in that intake on the Conservative benches, because if you are part of a large intake, and I think the 2010 intake was a bit the same, it's very competitive. You want to sort of make sure that the media notice you, that the Prime Minister notices you. And it seemed to me at the time to be a bit of a race between Michael Howard and Edwina Currie as to who was going to be the first for that intake to be made a minister.
Yeah, you see, I wasn't part of any of that because I didn't have connections. I knew one or two MPs, but I didn't have any connections, so I wasn't expecting anything. So this pushiness and trying to shine in front of the media, I wasn't aware of it initially, but my goodness, I was eventually. And you mentioned Edwina, for goodness sake, when I stood up to make my maiden speech, it was packed, following on our side Ted Heath, and I said, Mr. Speaker, it's a great honour for me to address the House for the first time. And she piped up, and about time too. And the whole place went completely silent. And there I was, I had these little postcards, which John Major, who was my whip then, had helped me to write. You do 10 minutes, so I had 10 cards, helped me to write. So then it was explained to me that she was very, very ambitious. Michael, who I knew both of them extremely well, obviously. And then it was explained to me that Michael, who was older, was also very ambitious as well. But it wasn't immediately obvious to me because I wasn't part of this group, which of course still exists today, of candidates who expect to win and are working because they're certain to win as far as they're concerned, and then immediately start operating. I'm not going to share with you, Ian, who of the 2019 intake operated like that, but there are some. And because of
I can think of a couple.
I bet, of course you can, but I'm not going to share them because they're still colleagues. So, hey, I mean, they both became ministers.
What was your first encounter with Margaret Thatcher?
Oh, my first encounter with Margaret was when I was asked to take part in her first party political broadcast as leader. I can't remember if I was chairman of the association then. I mean, this is Newham North West Conservative Association. And I was called to Smith Square to make this broadcast with her. And there was a young lady and a chap called Ted Atwell, who was very famous in Thurrock. He was sort of seen as Alf Garnett, really. And Margaret, she had a weakness for all sorts of things, but she did have a weakness for that sort of conservative. So this sort of transit van type affair pulled up in Smith Square, and we all got into it. So we spent the journey from Smith Square to Elstree Film Studios, where we were going to record this party political broadcast.
Well, Margaret Thatcher was in the transit van as well.
She was.
Goodness me.
She was. And that's really when I became to admire her beyond belief, because during the whole of the journey, it's a bit of a journey really from Smith Square to Elstree, was Ted Atwell sat next to her. He never shut up throughout the whole of the journey. And you know, there are some people who keep doing that to get your attention. He was doing that. I thought, oh, goodness sake, will you shut up, man? He kept on and on and on. Got to the studio. Margaret was very nice to the young lady who I think was wearing, she wasn't undressed, but she needed a bit of covering up, so she got a cardigan or something for her. We started the programme and, wait for it, there was a cot and a baby in the cot. I don't know how we did it, but there was a ball and chain round the baby's leg, and that was representing the debt of the Labour Party. Well, he couldn't do it. Every time he was asked to do his bit, he just froze completely. We had take after retake after retake. And I thought, this woman, she was so lovely, so down to earth, not like the way some people portrayed her. That was my first encounter. But now thinking about it, I was chairman of the association. We went to her house in Flood Street and we gave her a little basket of flowers, I think from the Primrose League or something. But, oh, my goodness, I think there are a couple of pictures of us looking, well, not as we... Well, Margaret eventually looked fantastic, but there she was in her pinafore dress, and I'm like that, very dour together, and she became this iconic figure much later in life.
Were you disappointed that she never made you a minister?
Nope.
Because you became PPS...
Now, do you believe me, Iain?
I'm not sure I do.
Okay.
I mean, I think there are people who go into Parliament really not caring if they become a minister or not. And I think there are many, many MPs who are quite happy being constituency MPs. But I suspect that once you get there, maybe you sort of see other people and you think, well, actually, I think I'm better than them. Why have they been made a minister? Why haven't I? And you were Michael Portillo's PPS for quite a long time, weren't you?
Oh, nearly 10 years.
And, I mean, often when a cabinet minister has a PPS, that normally they will sort of see to it that PPS gets on.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen for you, and I've never understood why.
Well, look, in your life, you have regrets. We've all got regrets. We've all made mistakes. I've made so many mistakes, misjudging people, trusting people and all that. I really was not driven by ambition. And possibly, as my time spent continued, perhaps I do regret I should have been pushier, really. And I think I was driven because I had this marginal seat.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely focused on the constituency. I know people used to laugh at me. They got fed up with Basildon. We had, I love Basildon stickers.
No, but it worked. That's the thing. Everybody knew about Basildon because of what you used to do.
And now they know about
Southend.
City. Yeah, so I'm obsessed with things. But so I was not worried about the constituency, but I was concentrated on the constituency, and I wasn't really, horrible expression, sucking up to people in Westminster. So I never really, Iain, believe it or not, had a conversation with Michael saying, well, can't you push me a bit more than this? Can't you get me a job? Which, of course, is what people do now. Yeah. They just go into the Chief Whip's office, I want an honour, I want this, I want that, and they often get it. I wasn't like that, and I was so sort of grateful for everything. And, some of the ministers, absolutely, I'm not going to name them, useless. Useless. And now, because I'm on the chairman's panel chairing things, I can see how challenged some of them are with their brief. But
uncharacteristically diplomatic, if I may say so.
Yeah. So I could have done one or two jobs.
What would you have liked to have, if you could had your choice of jobs, what would you have liked to have done?
Well, in one reshuffle, and I can always remember a Labour chap who's now dead saying to me, David, don't become bitter about it. I mean, I wasn't bitter, but we were very friendly. He said, I've just seen they've renamed the shuffles, because the way Margaret did it, it was always as we were about to start the summer recess. Yeah. So the disappointment they do it all differently now. So I tried not to become bitter, but one particular reshuffle, it was rumoured that I would become a health minister and take Asweena's place, which it didn't happen. But I would have liked to have been a health minister. I'm not saying would have they wouldn't consider me as leader of the House of Commons. Would like to be. They used to have a deputy, and I think I could have done that job because I am a House of Commons person. I do sort of understand the way the place works. So I think I could have helped in the background. And the other job probably I would have liked would have been something to do with the environment. But hang on, Ian, animals. I would have liked to have had something to do with animal welfare in the health office. I mean, God, there are so many jobs I wouldn't like to touch with a barge pole. Minister for Social Security, for goodness sake. But
someone's got to do it.
I know. How did Norman Fowler be Secretary of State for Health and Social Security?
Yeah.
You tell me that. And he was so good on...
Because it nearly killed his successor, didn't it? John Moore, we all turned up to... The office was in the Elephant and Castle there, and he began to lose his voice. And they said it was through the air conditioning in the building. I don't know there, but Ian, the pressure that I've seen colleagues under throughout the years, we're all sinners. I've known what's gone on in their private life, and hey, look, one or two colleagues took their own lives and have died in very, very sad circumstances. And the idea that it's all joy and smooth, it isn't really. It does take a great toll on people's lives. But to get back to your answer on ministers, yes, I do think I could have been a minister. Has it left me bitter? No, because I'm still there. I'm still a member of Parliament. You've always been seen as a sort of out-and-out right-winger. Do you think that's maybe held you back a little bit?
Yes.
I was looking at your Wikipedia page earlier, and if it had said Anne Widdecombe at the top rather than David Amess, it wouldn't have surprised me, given some of the views that were being attributed to you.
I know. We are great friends, and okay, Anne did scale great heights, but she didn't exactly get to the top because she's always expressed her views vehemently, and I have as well, whether it be on the European Union. I've always been pro-life. Now that isn't very fashionable these days. I have lent towards the right, but Ian, as you age, you become less of a rebel. You become sort of more pragmatic in your views. And I was talking to Bill Cash the other day. Can't believe he's 81.
Is he?
81. It was his birthday this week, and my goodness, he doesn't look it. And I just think, you have to sort of be sanguine about these things. I count my blessings. I've been in Parliament when Margaret Thatcher was at her peak. And I've been so blessed with all the different twists and turns that have happened. I never thought that I'd be a member of Parliament when we left the European Union. I still can't believe it. And I've had so many prime ministers, I think I'm nearly in double figures, really.
But do you think that age has mellowed you a bit in some of your social views? I mean, you voted against the equal age of consent, you voted against equal marriage. Would you do that now?
Look, it's never going to happen again. These things, okay, people are going to say, oh, it's because of his religion, etc. I just always felt, now don't shout at me, Ian.
I'm just sitting here listening.
I felt that for two women or two men to get married in a church and all
but that wasn't in the legislation.
Yeah, I know, but it was sort of influencing things. And, frankly now, I couldn't care less what anyone is up to in that regard. I don't like people being forced into one sort of particular sexual thing, but you are as you are, and the way you're brought up, and you're on life's journey, and the whole world has changed completely. I'm bored silly with people going on about their sexuality, frankly, absolutely obsessing about it. I'm uncomfortable with...
But if there was a bill that came to the House of Commons next week to repeal the Equal Marriage Act, how would you vote in that?
Oh, I wouldn't be in favour of repealing.
See, I think this is really interesting because I asked Anne Widdecombe that same question about
what did she say?
a year ago, and she said exactly what you've just said.
Yeah.
And I was actually quite surprised. I was pleasantly surprised because she was so adamant about it at the time, and I'm thinking, well, sort of the heavens haven't opened, there hasn't been a plague of locusts. I don't think that.
All those things have mellowed. I am still very, very strong on pro-life issues, and I do think we've sort of gone a bit too far with sex selection and all of that. And
well, let's not even get into that because the both of us will get sort of trolled if we start down that road. Yeah, what about capital punishment? Because you've always been a firm advocate of capital punishment.
Now, do you remember who used to be in charge of the lobby? He's now dead now.
Chris Moncrief.
You knew him straight away.
Press Association.
How stupid was I? I'm in the what was the bar called? Annie's bar. I don't drink heavily, but I was in there with someone. And he got me to say, myself and Peter Broomville, that we would pull the lever.
Well, we should explain to people, Peter Bruinvels. Now, which modern-day MP can we compare Peter Bruinvels to?
I know who, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to leave that one to you.
Well, basically, he was Rent-a-Gob, wasn't he? He was in a very marginal seat in, was it Leicester East?
Yeah.
And he was the media's go-to. He was the Andrew Bridgen of his day, wasn't he? Yes, yeah, that's who you were thinking of. I could tell. You couldn't say Mark Francois because he's a constituency neighbour, but it's Andrew Bridgen. And the media always knew that he gave good soundbite, to coin a phrase, didn't he? And he was a real hanger and flogger.
He was. Well, I would always deny that I said those words. Because I had a relative who was stabbed 52 times in a car park. So, I did have, in broad daylight, I had personal experience of this. And the wickedness of what was done, people blown up with the Irish Republican Army and all that. And I always felt, Ian, quite strongly that if I had had a loved one murdered, what right do they have to live? And, we think of the Yorkshire Ripper and the doctor who killed over 250 people or ever it was. But, it's never going to happen again. It's never going to happen again. I don't know how they cope with it in America, really, electrocuting people and poisoning them, all the rest of it. But I'm absolutely as tough could be on when someone has killed another person, that we've got to either keep them in prison forever.
Well, I've never been able to quite reconcile all this because I used to be a supporter of capital punishment, but changed my mind quite a long time ago. But I can never understand how, if you're pro-life, how can you be in favour of capital punishment?
Because life is totally precious. And my argument with being pro-life is that I think you have to protect life from the earliest stage it starts. So I think it's all it's totally pressure. So the capital punishment thing that is the worst thing that can happen. Now, you can argue keeping someone in prison, and I was on the Health Select Committee for 10 years, so you name it, I've been to every prison, and my friend Anne Widdecombe, when she was prisons minister, she literally visited every prison.
She did, yeah.
And, to be incarcerated in prison, it's pretty grim. It really is grim. Out there's not going to be any sympathy for them. So that's how I sort of brought the two arguments together, that you're protecting life because it's all important, and if you take that life away, then you pay the ultimate price. You lose your own life. But as I say now, I've mellowed, and we're never gonna.
You're becoming positively One Nation.
No, I see now that we should have. In fact, if you heard me, like Victor Meldrew, saying to my colleagues, Margaret had a wonderful agenda. I want the Conservative Party now to have a new agenda as well, to address the way the world is now, and the world has changed completely. Yeah. But that doesn't mean to say, Ian, I don't keep fighting for higher standards in the House of Commons, conviction politicians. I want politicians who believe in things. You know, Margaret never followed things. She told us what she believed in and then tried to persuade people to support her in that view. You know, people changing their parties, getting elected as Conservatives, and then as soon as they're there, oh, I'm not in favour of this, I'm not in favour of that. They signed up to these things when they stood for the Conservative Party. I mean, if you had been elected, Iain, you would have stood by what you had signed up to in the manifesto. Yeah, you might have rebelled during the course of a parliament.
Oh, I think I'd have been the male Nadine Dorris.
The male Nadine.
There's a thought. But she's Minister of State now, so there we go.
Who'd have thought that when she first started?
You love a good campaign, don't you? And you've had quite a few successes. You've got a few bits of legislation on the statute book. What was it? Banning tethering, and then also an energy conservation bill you got through. You started a campaign to get a statue for Raoul Wallenberg, and now you're campaigning for a statue of Dame Vera Lynn.
Yeah. I love Vera. Her voice, her life story, and I know it's been controversial over the last year or so, statues, but I'm just so excited by this project because Dover Council have been so proactive. They're thrilled at the prospect. And the idea that we're going to have, we're calling it a memorial, not definitely decided what the finished article will be, but if you can sort of imagine, one possibility is of Vera wearing her fatigues with the soldiers around her, and there she will be at one end of this amphitheatre, and all these concerts will be taking place, and she'll be looking over the channel. I think it's a marvellous project. And look, I say to any colleague, I mean, I doubt if they do listen to me, but who asks for a bit of advice, you can't do everything. And you're only here for a short time, really. You've got to concentrate on a few things. And if you can make a bit of a difference, so through these bills, another one was to stop people counterfeiting things through their equipment, then you can make a difference. And although I wasn't the one who came up with the money for the statue to Raoul Wallenberg, and someone gave me a book, a friend of mine called Paul Lennon. I read the story and I thought, my God, he saved the lives of 100,000 Jews through the shouldn't pass thing. And it was Siggy Sternberg, who's dead now, who led the fundraising campaign. But you can do things. But we used to have parliamentarians who got to know procedure far better than they do now. So you don't have to be a minister. In fact, so many ministers here don't have much power, really, frankly, do they? You can count on your hand.
Well, do you remember Gillian Shepherd?
Yeah, I do.
She used to say that, I mean, she came up, I think, from a parish councillor to district councillor to county councillor, MP, junior minister, cabinet minister. And she reckoned that at every level that she reached, she thought power was at the level above her. But when she got to that level above, she realised, no, it's the level above. And even when she was a cabinet minister, she realised, actually, it's the Prime Minister who has all the power. And it's knowing how to deploy that power that is the secret to success, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so I say, as a backbencher, if you spend time with the clerks, learn about the way the place works, then you don't have to wait for the loyal address to support government legislation, not only through the private members' ballot, 20 people's names drawn out of that, but through 10-minute book bills, presentation bills behind the chair. Because these days, if you can sort of butter up enough opposition members, it wasn't like in my day you had Eric Forth and David McLean who knew the procedure inside.
And John Bercow.
And absolutely. Then you can get them to shut up, and you can get legislation on the book, and it can make a real difference in to people's lives. And I've always been strong on animal welfare, but you mentioned the tethering bill. Tristan Garel-Jones, extraordinary character. I know he's dead now. He was trying to encourage someone to object to my tethering bill because, you know, he had a different view on the way animals should be protected. So, yeah, you don't have to be a minister to get things done. As an ordinary backbencher, which is what I've been, you can still make a difference to people.
Brass Eye, I've got to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Was that Sacha Baron Cohen?
No.
It wasn't it, but it was a sort of similar thing.
Chris
Morris, that's it. You were set up, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Just explain that. And because at the time, I imagine, in the aftermath, was sort of, you probably felt a bit humiliated.
Oh,
but looking back on it, can you laugh at it now?
I can, but I have to be careful, Ian, because at the heart of it was a tragedy. So a constituent in Basildon called Leah Betts went to a discotheque called Raquel's and was given ecstasy and died as a result of that.
And that was massive news at the time, wasn't it?
It was. And that's how this chap, Chris Morris, I didn't know who he was. So the idea that someone would turn up at 1 Parliament Street wearing a wig and would want to interview me about all this. And of course, you can see it now with this giant pill, etc. And Tony Newton, who was such a great guy.
He was.
You know, he answered it at the dispatch box that there was this thing called cake. The civil servants thought that there was a slang thing called cake. So I was set up. I mean...
but there were several. It wasn't just you, was it?
Oh, no.
Was Jerry Hayes one of them?
Yeah, you got a good memory. Sebastian Coe.
Yeah.
There were any number of us. And, I was sort of set up on 2 or 3 naive. And it was as a result of that, then, I made it a firm rule never to do things on my own, always have someone or a couple of people from my office with me just to check everything.
I think we've got 5 of them over there.
to get everything in writing. So I don't want you to name these people, but that is why years later I'm astonished that a number of colleagues, and it really messed their careers up, allowed themselves to be set up. So I'm very, very cautious now with what I do. But in the early days, I was very naive. I thought everyone was a good guy, a good girl. Oh, I don't think that anymore, Ian.
Looking back, what do you think you would have liked to have done differently, apart from not met Chris Morris?
Ooh. I very much regret that in the Basildon days, I didn't use a couple of my children politically, but my son got involved in the eye of a storm, paid a great price for it because I wanted to send him to a single-sex Catholic school. It wasn't a private school. It was comprehensive, but a terrible storm broke out about that, and I will never forget and forgive, some of them are around still, the Labour politicians who went to town about that. And I also regret the way that my leave in Basildon, because it wasn't that I left Basildon, I mean, that's what the media caught on to. It was a 20,000 population shift. It wasn't Basildon anymore. It was part of Thurrock, part of Basildon. I tried to persuade, I won't say who, to even change the name of the new constituency. But I do regret, in hindsight, the way that I transferred from Basildon to Southend, because some of the bitterness did continue, really. I love Essex, but of course it was very, very close to home. I've gotten over all that. And you see in Basildon, it was just me. It was David Amess.
Yeah.
In Southend, there were 2 MPs, and that was a bit tricky, you know, competition and all of that. So you were basically accused of going on the so-called chicken run, weren't you? Yeah.
But, I mean, if you know, because the seat did go, it was Angela Smith that won it, wasn't it, in 97?
But she didn't win the seat that I represented it.
But it was still called that. That was the problem.
Yes, she managed to perpetuate.
She was actually a good MP as well.
She managed she managed to perpetuate this lie, bringing Tony Blair down there, milking it for all it's worth. Oh, crazy! But you know, you're now tempting me to get into the sort of, why didn't she stand in Southend West for Labour eventually? Why didn't she fight the county council seat in a particular? I mean, this gets very, very complicated. You see, I was criticised totally unjustly. Never forget, Ian, that every time I stood up in Parliament, Labour MPs to a man and woman would say, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, and I had the last. So I do sort of regret all of that. But you can't live your life with regrets. What I don't regret is standing as a Conservative candidate in Basildon and then becoming the MP for Southend West. It was the way the whole thing was handled, which wasn't good, really.
But you're clearly still enjoying it.
Oh, I am. I'm only halfway through my career.
Well, this is it, in that you have always looked about 10 years younger than you really are, haven't you?
Well, you need to go to Specsave.
And I wish I had that talent, but...
I'm very well. Now, I've always, because, I do love the place. Is that sad?
No, not at all.
You know,
I think too many MPs treat it with contempt.
Well, I've got no time for that, and I agree with you about that. And that brings us all into contempt. This is not a game. This is serious. We represent people, and they've got so much hope in them. So, you know, my pride and joy is when you can help and make a real difference for someone's life. You don't get any publicity for it, but you can. There are so many things that you can do that can transform people's lives. OK, I'm signed up to the Conservative Party philosophy. I happen to think that that is the best approach to running our country. I've got lots of friends in other political parties as well. But, I still enjoy being an MP. But what I would say, Ian, is I wouldn't start on the journey afresh the way it is today, because of my experiences aren't replicated now. But for the new MP, they only know the way it is now. So, you know, they think it's all marvellous, really. And, you know, to talk about the good old days, you know, they wouldn't have experienced it. They sort of humour me a bit, and they want to listen to it. But yeah, I think it's the greatest privilege that anyone can have, really, to be elected to our parliament. And I still happen to think, I won't say the mother of all parliaments, but I do think it's the best parliament in the world.
Well, that's a good way to end. And I mean, the book, it's been out a few months now, hasn't it? I think it's a really good thing that you've written this, because back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of MPs would write books about what it's like in Parliament. I remember John Biffin wrote a really good one.
It was brilliant.
And very few people do now, partly because I think publishers just don't think that they'll sell. Yeah. So it's called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster by David Amess, available at all good and probably some very bad bookshops as well. You can even buy it from politicos.co.uk. David, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.